settle in, and let the day drift away from you. Let the last few hours soften at the edges, the way a candle flame softens the corners of a dark room. You are here now, in this quiet space, and that is all you need to be. The world outside will wait. It always does. And tonight, we are going somewhere very far away and very long ago, to a place where the ground itself floated on water. If you can, imagine yourself lying down or sinking deep into a comfortable chair with a blanket pulled up to your chin. Feel the weight of the blanket, warm and gentle, like a hand resting on your chest. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breathing slow, just a little, and let each breath you take be a little softer than the last, because we are in no hurry tonight. There is no deadline, no alarm, no urgent errand waiting. There is only a story, and all the time in the world to tell it. And what a story it is. It is a story about farmers. Not just any farmers, mind you. These were farmers who grew their food on the surface of a great lake. They grew corn and beans and squash and tomatoes and bright orange marigolds, all on land that did not quite exist until they built it. They made their own earth, layer by layer, by hand, in the middle of shallow water. And their gardens, these beautiful floating gardens, fed an entire empire. We call them Chinampas. That is a word that comes from the Nahuatl language, the language spoken by the Aztecs, who lived in the great city-state of Tenochtitlan, in the Valley of Mexico. And it is a word that has come down to us with a lovely, lilting sound, a sound that seems to drift, like the gardens themselves seem to drift on the water. Chinampa. Say it softly, and you can feel the water just under the sound. Chinampa. Now, before we wade out into the lake and meet the farmers themselves, we should set the stage a little. We should understand the world they lived in, because it is a world so different from ours that it almost feels like a dream. And what better place to dream than here, in the quiet of late night, with the curtains drawn and the house settled around you. The Valley of Mexico. Close your eyes for a moment and just let that phrase sit in your mind. A valley ringed by mountains. But this is not a dry, dusty valley, not the kind you might imagine with cactuses and sun-baked rocks. This is a valley that in the days of the Aztecs held a cluster of great, gleaming lakes. There was Lake Texcoco in the center, the largest of them all. Around it, like a family gathered close, were smaller lakes, Lake Xochimilco to the south, Lake Chalco to the southeast, and others, all connected by the precious, shifting waters of the region. And in the middle of Lake Texcoco, on a marshy island, there grew the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan. You might have heard of it. It was a city of pyramids and palaces, of wide causeways that ran across the water like ribbons of stone, of markets that teemed with so many people, and so many goods that the Spanish soldiers who first saw it thought they were dreaming. But tonight, we are not going to the grand central plaza, to the great temple with its steep steps. We are not going to the royal palaces with their jaguar thrones and feather headdresses. Tonight, we are going to the edges of the city, to the outskirts, where the water grew shallow and the reeds stood tall. Tonight, we are going to the fields, because because every great city needs to eat. And Tenochtitlan was a very great city with a very great appetite. It is one thing to build a city on an island in the middle of a lake. It is quite another to feed the many thousands of people who live there. There were farmers, yes, in the valley, farming the land around the shores. But the city itself was surrounded by water, and the people of the city needed a way to grow food close to home. They needed a miracle. And so, out of the shallow, marshy water, they built one. This is the part of the story that should make you smile, just a little, because it is so clever and so simple at the same time. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a shallow lake. The water is only a few feet deep. The bottom is muddy and soft. Reeds grow thick along the shore. If you try to farm out there in the water, you will fail. Seeds will wash away. The ground is not solid. But what if you made the ground? What if you built up a great, thick layer of earth that rose above the surface of the water and anchored it in place so that it would not float away? What if you created your own island, a long, narrow rectangle of rich, black soil, and you dug canals all around it so that you could paddle your canoe right up to your crops? That, in essence, is the Chinampa. And the more you learn about it, the more it seems like a kind of quiet magic. The farmers of the Valley of Mexico did not fight the water. They did not push it away or try to drain it all. They welcomed the water. They made it useful. They moved into the water, and they made gardens that floated at the meeting of two worlds, the world of the dry earth and the world of the lake. Let us take a closer look at how they did this, because the process is gentle and methodical, the kind of process that would have been passed down from grandfather to father to son, and mother to daughter for generations. There is a rhythm to it, rocking and slow, like the rhythm of a canoe on a calm lake. First, you would choose a spot in the shallow water. You would look for a place where the water was calm and quiet, and maybe 3 or 4 feet deep. Not too deep. You would use a long pole to feel the bottom, to make sure there was a good layer of soft mud there. And then you would begin to build. The farmers would start by staking out the corners of their plot. They drove wooden posts into the muddy bottom, and they wove reeds and brush between the posts in a pattern like a fence. It is like creating a basket, a giant, flat basket that would hold the earth. Then, into that basket, they piled the materials they found all around them. They pulled up thick clumps of water weeds, like lily pads and other aquatic plants, and they layered them on the bottom. They scooped up mud from the lake bed, rich and black, and teeming with all the nutrients that water plants have been storing for years, and they piled that on top of the weeds. They added more weeds and more mud, and then, at the very top, they spread a final layer of good, clean soil. The result was a long, raised bed, maybe 100 feet long, sometimes more, and perhaps 15 or 20 feet wide. It rose a little above the surface of the water, and around it, on all sides, were the canals. The canals were not just a byproduct, not just a hole left over. They were an essential part of the design. They were the roads. They were the highways. And every day, the farmers would glide along these canals in their canoes, checking on their crops, carrying tools, carrying harvest, carrying the family. The first time you look at a map of the Chinampa region, you might be struck by how much it looks like a strip of corduroy cloth. Long parallel lines everywhere. The beds side by side, separated by the water of the canals. And these lines stretch for miles and miles across what had once been the lakes of Xochimilco and Chalco. By the time the Spanish arrived, there were tens of thousands of acres of Chinampas. The whole southern shore of the Lake District was a great, productive grid of green and blue. Now, I want you to imagine a morning there, a morning on the Chinampas, because this is where the story becomes truly quiet and lovely. And I think, if you are lying there with your eyes closed, you can almost picture it. It is very early. The sun has not yet risen, but the sky is beginning to pale in the east, a soft gray-silver light that is just enough to see by. The air is cool and damp. There is a mist rising off the water, a thin white blanket that hovers over the canals. The water is as still as glass, reflecting the pale sky. And out of this mist, you begin to hear the sounds of the morning. A bird calls, a sweet, clear note. Another answers farther away. And then, slowly, you hear the sound of a paddle dipping into the water, dripping, dipping again. There is no motor. There is no drone. Just the soft, repeated whisper of wood meeting water. A canoe emerges out of the mist. It is a dugout canoe, hollowed from a single great tree, and it moves through the water with almost no effort. In the canoe, there is a farmer, warm in a simple cotton cloak, perhaps, and there is a child. Grandson, granddaughter, son, daughter. It is time to check the garden. The canoe slips into the canal that runs alongside the family Chinampa. The farmer reaches out a hand and pushes gently against the raised bed, steering the canoe along its length. And here, right at water level, the garden unfolds like a long green ribbon. There are rows of maize, of corn, standing tall and straight, their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. The stalks are taller than a man, and they sway gently like dancers bowing. At the base of the maize, the farmer has planted beans, and the bean vines twist up the corn stalks, holding on, climbing toward the sun. And between the rows, low and sprawling, there are squash plants with their broad, soft leaves and their bright yellow flowers that open to greet the morning. This is the great trio of Mesoamerican agriculture, the three sisters. They are sometimes called corn, beans, and squash. They are good companions. The corn gives the beans something to climb. The beans, in their way, give the corn and the squash nutrients from the air, fixing nitrogen in the soil. And the squash, with its broad leaves and trailing vines, keeps the soil cool and moist and discourages the weeds. It is a partnership, a gentle agreement made long ago, and the Chinampa farmers knew exactly how to arrange it. But the Chinampas did not stop at the three sisters. On these beds, the farmers grew a dizzying variety of things. There were chilies, small and green and fierily potent, and tomatoes, which were not the big red orbs we have today, but small, ribbed fruits, a little like our cherry tomatoes, with a deeper, more complex flavor. There were avocados, heavy on their trees, and there were many kinds of squash. There were amaranth, whose tiny seeds are now making a comeback as a superfood, and chia, and there were flowers, great drifts of them. Marigolds, which the Aztecs called cempasúchil, the flower of the dead, with their brilliant orange and gold petals. They grew them for festivals, for offerings, for decoration. The Chinampa region, even today, is famous for its flower markets, and this tradition goes all the way back to those floating gardens. Let us dip our hand into the water of the canal. Do you feel it? It is cool and a little bit silty, but look down into it. If the morning sun has now climbed a little higher and the light is slanting through the water, you will see that the water is not just water. It is full of life. There are fish, and not just any fish. There were small species of fish called axolotl. No, wait. The axolotl is an amphibian, a kind of salamander, and it too lived in these lakes. The axolotl is a strange and wonderful creature with feathery external gills and a permanently smiling face, and it was an important food source for the Aztecs. But there were also fish and frogs and waterfowl, all of them thriving in the shallows, all of them adding to the rich diet of the people who lived there. The canals, too, were managed. The farmers did not leave them to nature entirely. They regularly dredged the bottoms of the canals, scooping up the rich, decaying mud and water weeds that had sunk to the bottom. And do you know what they did with that mud? They piled it on top of the Chinampas. This is the secret to the endless fertility of these floating gardens. Every year, the level of the bed would rise a little, and every year they would add another layer of fresh, nutrient-rich lake muck. It is a cycle of renewal. The water feeds the land, and the land feeds the people. And this is why the Chinampas could be so astonishingly productive. Some historians estimate that a single Chinampa could produce multiple harvests a year. You could grow and harvest and plant again, and again, and again. The warm climate of the valley, coupled with the constant moisture of the lake, meant that there was almost no season when something was not growing. All of this was done by hand, with a digging stick, with a paddle, with a canoe. There were no oxen to pull plows in the traditional sense, and while there is some debate about whether the Aztecs had any form of animal traction, for the most part, the Chinampa farmer worked with their own 2 arms and the simple tools they had made. A wooden digging stick, sharpened at one end, a stone-bladed hoe, a basket for carrying. These were the instruments of an agricultural marvel, and it was a marvel that demanded a certain kind of attention. A Chinampa is not a field in the middle of a broad plain. It is a narrow strip of earth, surrounded on all sides by water. It needs constant care. The edges must be maintained, the posts replaced, the reeds rewoven when they rot. The soil must be replenished. The water level must be managed, because in the dry season, the lake would shrink, and in the rainy season, it would rise. The farmers had to know the water, read the lake the way a sailor reads the sea, but more softly, more slowly. They had to work with the water, not against it. There's a story about the mayor of one of the towns in the Chinampa region, in the years just before the Spanish conquest. The king of Tenochtitlan, to test the ingenuity of his neighbors, or perhaps just to enjoy a little wonder. Ask them to send him some delicacy, some special produce. And the mayor, or the leader of that town, gathered a canoe and filled it, not with gold or with fancy featherwork, but with something that I think captures the heart of this whole system. They sent a swarm of ducks. No, that is not quite it. Let me tell it properly. There was a ruler named Moctezuma, the second of that name, the last great ruler of the Aztecs. He was a powerful man with a vast empire at his feet, and he was known to appreciate beauty and strangeness. The people of the Chinampa town, perhaps it was Xochimilco, wanted to present him with a gift that would honor him. And so they built something truly remarkable. In a canoe, in the water, they created a miniature floating garden. It had tiny trees and flower beds and small houses. And apparently, it was so beautiful that Moctezuma and his court, when they saw it, were full of wonder and delight. They tried to figure out how it worked, how it could hold water, how the trees could grow there, and so on. It was a little piece of the Chinampa world, a reminder that the whole landscape was a kind of garden, a cultivated, intentional beauty. And this, I think, is one of the things that makes the Chinampas so special. They were not only for food, they were for delight. In the Aztec world, the gardens were places of repose and reflection. The great kings had their own pleasure gardens, where plants from all over the empire were grown, where birds sang in the trees, and where the sound of water was always present. The Chinampa farmers, too, must have known this pleasure. To work in a Chinampa is to work in a place of profound beauty. You are surrounded by water, by the reflection of the sky, by the green of the plants, by the movement of the clouds. The sun is warm when it needs to be warm, and there is always the breeze off the lake to keep you company. Let us think about the daily life of one of these farmers, because I want to slow down now and spend a little time there. We are in no hurry. There is no need to rush to the end of the story. The story can unfold like a leaf unfurling on the first day of spring. Our farmer, let us call him Cuauhtemoc. That is a name that means descending eagle, and it was the name of a great Aztec hero, so we will borrow it. Cuauhtemoc lives in a small house on the edge of his Chinampa, or perhaps on a tiny island near his holdings. The house is made of adobe brick, and its roof is thatched with grass, and it has 1 or 2 small rooms. Inside, the floor is packed earth, smooth and swept clean. There's a cooking fire in a stone hearth, and the smoke rises through a small vent in the roof. The fire gives a gentle warmth and lights the interior with a soft, flickering glow. Cuauhtemoc rises before dawn. This is the habit of farmers across the world, across the ages. There is something in the early morning, the stillness, the coolness, that calls to those who work the land. He wraps his cloak around his shoulders, a cloak made of cotton, in a simple pattern. He walks down to the water's edge, where his canoe is tied to a post. He steps in carefully and unties the rope and pushes off with his paddle. There is no lantern needed, because by now the sky is beginning to lighten. The water is calm. The paddle moves through it with a soft, swishing sound, and the canoe goes forward. He is heading to his main Chinampa, a long, beautiful bed he has worked for many years. It was his father's before him, and his grandfather's before that. He remembers coming here as a boy, carrying bundles of weeds. He remembers his father teaching him how to judge the soil, how to pat it down with his hands, how to plant the seeds at just the right depth. He glides his canoe alongside the Chinampa. He can see, at the waterline, the old reeds woven between the posts. They are decaying, but they still hold, and he knows that next month he will need to add some new ones. He climbs out of the canoe, holding onto the strong stalks of the plants to keep his balance. The ground is soft and springy beneath his feet. It is not like walking on solid earth. It feels almost like walking on a very thick cushion with a living quality to it. He walks along the length of the bed. In the dim light, he can see the dew on the leaves. He passes the maize, which is well along, with its cobs just beginning to fill. He passes the beans, which are flowering, and he notes the small purple and white blossoms. He reaches a section where a few weeks ago he planted tomatoes. There they are, sturdy plants, bearing small green orbs the size of his thumb. He kneels down, and with his digging stick, he loosens the soil around one of them, not too deep, just to let the water in. He has brought a basket of lake mud, dredged from the bottom of the canal, and he spreads a little of it around the base of the plant. The smell of the mud is rich and earthy, not unpleasant at all. It smells like life. He moves on. He checks the chilies. He pinches off a leaf of an amaranth plant and tastes it, just to see how it is coming along. He works his way to the far end of the bed, where his squash are sprawling in great arcs and fans. He finds a flower that has finished blooming, and he counts the little fruits taking its place, and he nods to himself, satisfied. By the time he has finished his rounds, the sun is up. The mist has burned off the canal, and the water is sparkling in the light. The whole world is green and gold and blue. He sits down on the edge of his Chinampa, dangling his feet into the water, and he takes out a little bundle of tortillas he brought from home. He wraps them in a cloth, and he unwraps one, and he eats it slowly as he looks out over his domain. And what is his domain? Not a great estate, not a mighty plantation, just a strip of land. But it is everything. It is the world he built with his own hands. It is the world his ancestors built before him. It is a world that is alive, teeming with growth, sustained by the ancient water. In that moment, sitting there, he is as rich as any king. And he knows it, I think, in the quiet way that those who live close to the earth know things. But of course, the Chinampa world was not one farmer alone. It was a community. It was a network of families living on and around their gardens, connected by the canals. The canals were not just for farming. They were the streets, the highways, the neighborhoods. In the morning, you would see the canoes gliding to and fro, carrying people to market, carrying children to lessons, carrying women to the communal washing spots, where they would scrub clothes on flat stones at the water's edge. The water was the center of public life. Everyone was a sailor of a sort, from the youngest child, who could paddle before they could walk, to the oldest grandmother, who could navigate the canals with her eyes closed. In the marketplace, which in Tenochtitlan was said to be the most extraordinary market in the world, you would find the produce of the Chinampas displayed in colorful abundance. The Spanish soldier Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was there, wrote about it with wonder in his eyes. He described the stalls, the crowds, the great varieties of goods, and among them the vegetables and fruits. He mentioned the tomatoes and the beans and the chilies. It is almost a miracle that we have this testimony from him, a soldier who, despite his many flaws, was a careful observer. He lets us see, through his words, the fruits of the floating gardens spread out for sale 500 years ago. But let us not go all the way to the big city market yet. There are other things to see. There is a kind of beauty in the details of the Chinampa system that is worth lingering on. Let us consider, for example, the trees. The Chinampas were not only for low crops. The farmers planted trees along the edges and at the corners of their beds, especially willows, which love wet feet. The willow is a tree that seems made for water. Its roots go down into the canal, and its branches stretch up, long and graceful, and it anchors the Chinampa, binding it together. When you look at a row of willows lining the channels, you understand why the region feels so calm and so ordered. The trees mark the boundaries, and their leaves whisper in the wind, and on a warm afternoon, they cast a dappled shade that keeps the water cool. There were also fruit trees. The Aztecs grew several kinds of fruits, neither very large nor very sweet by the standards of the modern supermarket. But they were far more interesting. There was the tejocote, a small yellow-orange fruit. There was the sapote, with its soft, sweet brown flesh. And there was a kind of pineapple-like fruit, grown in the more tropical parts of the empire. But the Chinampas were mostly high altitude, so the farmers favored the native cherries and small plums. These were enjoyed as treats, as the gift of a garden, and they added a little sweetness to a diet built on corn and beans. And because the Chinampas were so productive, the farmers had time for other things. They did not have to spend every hour of every day simply trying to survive. They could make beautiful things. They wove baskets from the reeds that grew along the canals. They made mats and fans and fishing nets. They carved wooden spoons and paddles. They shaped pots from the clay they found nearby, and they painted them with simple, elegant designs. The arts and crafts of the Chinampa people were not just for utility. They were for pleasure. There is something deeply human about this. When the belly is full, the hands begin to make beauty. The Chinampa farmers also had festivals, of course. The Aztec world was rich with festivals, tied to the agricultural calendar. When the corn was planted, when the first green shoots appeared, when the rain came, when the harvest was brought in, there was a ceremony. There were songs and dances and incense and offerings. The flowers from the Chinampas were always in demand because the Aztecs used flowers in nearly every religious rite. A single marigold could be an offering, a way of speaking to the gods. I should say, gently, that the Aztec world was not a peaceful, golden paradise. It was a world with complexity and with darkness. There were wars, and there were sacrifices, and there was human pain, and it would be wrong to turn away from that, or to pretend that the farmers were living in a different world entirely. The Chinampa farmers paid taxes to their lords and to the great king in Tenochtitlan. They served in the army when they were called. They lived within the structures of a powerful empire, and they were subject to its demands. But even if we acknowledge this, we can still be gentle in our telling, and we can still honor the deep, peaceful, quiet work that they did every day. The building of the floating gardens was not an act of war. It was an act of hope. It was a way of making a home, of making a life, of making something lasting out of mud and water and plants. And that is worth a soft story. Let us think now about the water itself. The water of the lakes was not always perfectly fresh. Lake Texcoco, the great central lake, was actually salty or brackish because it had no outlet, and over time, minerals accumulated in it. But the Chinampas were built in the southern lakes, in Xochimilco and Chalco, and those lakes were fed by freshwater springs. The water in those canals was clear and cool, much of it constantly replenished. That is why the Chinampas could thrive, and why the fish and the salamanders could thrive, and why the whole ecosystem held together. There is a word in Nahuatl, in the Aztec language, that I love. It is Xochitl, and it means flower. And from that word come so many other words, like Xochimilco, which means the place of the flower field. The town of Xochimilco, which still exists today, was at the heart of the Chinampa world. Even now, you can take a boat ride through the remaining canals, and you can see the Chinampas still being farmed in almost the same way they were farmed 800 years ago. The tradition has been remarkably persistent. It has survived the Spanish conquest, the draining of the lakes, the growth of Mexico City, and the pressures of the modern world. The fact that these floating gardens still exist, still in use, is a quiet kind of miracle. It is as if the patience of the old farmers is still embodied in the soil, still holding firm. If we could glide along one of those canals today, our canoe following the curve of the water, we would see that some things have changed, but the essence remains. The Chinampas are still there, long green strips, raised above the water. The willows still line the edges. The farmers still paddle out in their canoes, though now they might have a little motor on the back, humming softly. They still grow flowers, great bunches of them. They still grow vegetables. And if you were to taste a tomato from a Chinampa, you would know instantly that it is something different from the pale, watery tomatoes of the supermarket. It has a depth of flavor, a sun-kissed sweetness. It tastes like the water it came from. It tastes like the old earth. And this brings us to a very gentle thought. The same water, the same soil, the same techniques, from the far past to the near present. There is comfort in this continuity. The world changes so fast, and so much is lost. But a Chinampa is a place where time seems to move more slowly. The water laps against the banks. The corn grows upward. The seasons turn, but they turn without hurry. A farmer doing the same work in the same way as their great-great-grandparents has a connection to the past that most of us do not have. We can envy that a little. Let us pause now for just a moment in our story. If you are still lying there, comfortable, I want you to imagine that the noise of the world has completely faded. There is no more buzzing, no more hum of traffic, no more notifications. Instead, there is the sound of water, a gentle, lapping sound, like a dog drinking, or the sound of a breeze moving through leaves. And underneath that, the occasional birdsong. The air is soft, a little damp. You are warm, you are safe, and you are in a place where the land floats. There is a specific technique that the Chinampa farmers used for preparing the beds that is worth talking about, because it is so careful and so deliberate. It involves what you might call a raft. Before they built a completely solid Chinampa, they would sometimes create a floating platform of reeds and rushes. Picture a thick, dense mat of vegetation, woven and layered and compressed, that floated on the water. This was like a sponge or a boat. On this mat, the farmers would pile the lake mud and more vegetation. And over time, as the plants rooted and the soil compacted, it would become a solid, fertile bed that was, essentially, floating. The roots of the plants would grow down, through the mat, into the water, pulling nutrients directly from the water itself. This is why the Chinampas were sometimes called floating gardens, because in their early stages, they truly did float. And even when they were anchored to the bottom by their posts and their willows, the Chinampas maintained a special relationship with the water. They were, in a sense, always living between two worlds. The water was not a boundary. It was a partner. And the farmer, standing on his little strip of earth, was a person who understood both worlds. There is, in this, a lesson that is softly relevant to us in our own lives. We are so often trying to make the world conform to our expectations. We want solid ground everywhere, all the time. We want certainty. But the Chinampa farmers, they had a different approach. They did not expect the ground to be solid. They made it solid, but they knew that it was always a collaboration with the water. They knew that the ground they stood on was alive, was moving, was always being made. There is a calm in that knowledge. There is a release, a letting go. You do not have to control everything. You just have to work with what is around you, patiently, gently, season by season. And that, perhaps, is why the Chinampas remain so fascinating to us so many years later. They are a reminder that humans are capable of building things that are not scars on the landscape, but partners with it. They are a reminder that a great civilization can feed itself without destroying the place where it lives. And they are a reminder that the careful, slow work of a farmer, kneeling in the mud, patting the soil around a young tomato plant, is one of the most important and noble works there is. Let me tell you a little more about the tools and the daily implements. The Chinampa farmer had a few essential items. There was the digging stick, called a huickly, which was a long wooden pole with a flattened, slightly fire-hardened end. This was the universal tool of Mesoamerican agriculture. With it, the farmer could poke holes in the soil for seeds, could loosen the earth, could dig up weeds. It is a simple tool, but you can plant and harvest an entire empire with it. And indeed, they did. There was also a hoe with a blade made of stone for the heavier work of turning soil and scraping up the lake mud. And there was the paddle, which, while not a farming tool per se, was the key to transportation. Without the paddle, you could not reach your garden. The canoes themselves were a marvel. They were dugouts made from the trunks of large trees, often the great cypress tree, known as ahuhuit, the ancient tree that grows along the water. The cypress groves of the valley were vast and beautiful. The canoe makers would choose a straight, tall tree, fell it, and then painstakingly hollow out the trunk, using fire and stone tools. They would burn the interior and scrape away the charred wood, layer by layer, until they had a smooth, elegant vessel. These canoes were light enough to be paddled easily, but strong enough to carry heavy loads of produce. They were, in a way, the trucks of the Chinampa world. Life on the Chinampa involved the whole family. The children learned early to paddle and to handle the plants. There are scenes in the old Aztec codices, which are the picture books, if you will, that the Aztecs painted, that show parents teaching children how to plant and how to fish. The children are shown with their little digging sticks, working right alongside their elders. This is how knowledge was passed on, not in a classroom, but in the fields themselves by example. The child watched the parent and copied what they did. The parent corrected, guided, praised. It was a patient, embodied education. The women, too, were deeply involved. They did not just stay at home, if such a concept even existed in that world. They worked in the Chinampas, sowing, weeding, harvesting, carrying, and they managed the home. They ground the corn, a very hard work, on a stone metate, and they made the tortillas over the fire. They tended the children, and they also had their own sources of wealth and prestige. They could be traders, and they could own property. The daily life of the Chinampa household was a shared enterprise, a partnership between men and women, each with their roles, but both with their dignity. There is a beautiful scene that we might imagine near the end of the day. The sun is getting low in the west, casting long shadows across the canals. The water turns to gold and rose. A woman sits on the bank of a Chinampa with a basket of laundry at her side, and she is wringing out a cloth, the water dripping back into the canal with a warm, comfortable sound. Nearby, some children are paddling a little canoe in circles, laughing. A man, returning from the market, eases his canoe to the landing and begins to unload the goods. Another canoe glides by, carrying a neighbor, and they exchange a few soft words. The birds are settling in for the night. The world is growing quiet. This is the rhythm of the Chinampa life. And with the quiet, the stars begin to come out. The sky over the valley would have been brilliant with stars, far more than we can see from our cities today. The Milky Way would have been a great river of faint light, arched over the mountains, and the water of the canals would have reflected it all, so that the farmer, looking out from his garden, might have felt as if he were standing in the middle of the sky, with stars above and stars below. What a thing to feel, what a way to end the day, surrounded by the enormous, calm beauty of the universe. Our story is not finished. There is much more to tell. We have yet to follow the harvest to the great market, and to see the city that floated in the middle of the lake, and to understand how the empire grew out of these gardens. But for now, we can rest here in this quiet moment. The Chinampa is still under us, warm and alive. The water is still lapping gently at the banks, and we are here in the middle of it, breathing slowly, listening, drifting. Tomorrow there will be more story. Tonight there is enough. The floating gardens will keep floating. The farmers will keep farming. The water will keep holding them up, patient and soft, as it always has, and as it always will. So let yourself be held the way the gardens are held. Let yourself be a small, calm island in the middle of a gentle sea, and know that you are safe, and that the story will be here, waiting, whenever you are ready to return to it. But let us not leave this quiet moment just yet. There is something about the stillness of the night, out here on the water, that invites a little more lingering. The stars are still bright overhead, and the canals are dark mirrors, holding the sky upside down. If we listen closely, we can hear the soft sound of water against the reeds, and the occasional rustle of a small animal moving along the bank. Perhaps an opossum or a raccoon or some small creature of the night going about its quiet business. The Chinampa is never entirely still. Even in the dark, things are growing. The corn is stretching just a little toward the moon. The tomatoes are drinking in the cool night air. The roots are reaching down into the lake, drawing up the rich, dark water. It is a slow, silent work, and it happens best when the world is asleep. There is a kind of secret night language to the garden. If you were to lie down on the warm earth, on a bed of soft leaves, and press your ear to the ground, you might hear it. Not words exactly, but a low, humming song, the vibration of all the tiny creatures who live in the soil. The worms, the beetles, the countless little beings who spend their whole lives turning over the earth, digesting it, making it rich and dark and alive. The Chinampa is a whole world, hidden from us who walk on top of it. But it is there, just beneath the surface, working and pulsing with life. And when we know that the ground beneath us is so full of activity, so full of small, purposeful labors, it becomes easier to understand why the farmers treated their soil with such respect. They were not just working with dirt. They were working with a living community. And so we rest. The night passes, as all nights do, and the first pale signs of morning begin to gather in the east. The stars grow dimmer, one by one, as if they are being gently blown out, and the sky takes on a deep, soft blue, the color of a robin's egg, or of the morning glory flowers that twine around the fences of the gardens. The air is cool and damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and green things. There is a mist rising off the canals, thin and white, and it drifts over the Chinampas like a slow, silent tide. The world is waking up, but it is waking up slowly, the way it always does in the Valley of Mexico at this time of year. And out of one of the little houses, with its steep roof of thatch and its walls of adobe, a farmer emerges. He is maybe 40 years old, though he could be younger or older. It is hard to tell, for the outdoor life has given his skin a deep, weathered look, the color of good earth. He stretches his arms over his head, and he breathes in the morning air, and he walks down to the edge of his Chinampa, where a small canoe is tied to a wooden post. The canoe is still half full of water from the rain of the night before, and he patiently tips it, letting the water run back into the canal. And then he checks his paddles and his baskets and his digging stick, and he is ready for the day. But before he begins his work, he does something that might seem strange to us. He stands at the edge of the water, and he looks out over his garden, from one end to the other, slowly, carefully. He looks at the corn, tall and green, standing in neat rows. He looks at the beans, which are twining up the corn stalks, using them as living ladders. He looks at the squash, low and spreading, covering the ground with their broad, cool leaves. He looks at the tomatoes, heavy with fruit, and the chilies, bright green and red, and the flowers, a riot of color along the edges of the beds. And he nods. It is a small gesture, a private gesture, but it is full of meaning. It is a greeting and a thank you, and a kind of acknowledgement that he and the garden are partners, and that today, as every day, they will work together. There is a name for this feeling, this way of being with the land, but it does not translate easily into our modern language. It is not ownership in the way we think of it. It is more like stewardship or companionship. The farmer did not say that he owned his Chinampa. He said that he tended it, or that he worked it, or sometimes, with great affection, that he raised it. Because the Chinampa, remember, was not found. It was made. It was born from the lake, built up by hand over years and years. The farmer, or his father, or his grandfather, had created this piece of land out of mud and reeds and willows. And so there is a bond between the maker and the made, a relationship that is older and deeper than any idea of property. The morning sunrise over the Chinampas is a thing of great beauty. The light comes low across the water, a golden light, and it catches the tips of the corn leaves and the edges of the canoe and the shoulders of the farmer, and it turns everything to gold. The mist begins to burn off slowly, revealing the channels and the islands, one by one, as if the world were being born again, moment by moment. The birds, which have been quiet, begin to sing. There are herons standing gracefully at the water's edge, and there are small, quick birds darting through the reeds, and there are ducks, a whole family of them, paddling in a line across the canal. The farmer watches them for a moment, and then he unties his canoe, steps in, and pushes off from the bank with a single, practiced motion. The water is still and smooth, the color of old silver, and his paddle dips in and out with a soft, rhythmic sound. He is not in a hurry. He is moving along the canal, checking his garden, looking at the water level, talking to the other farmers who are also out in their canoes, their voices carrying across the water, low and friendly. They are discussing the weather, the rains that are coming, the price of tomatoes in the market, the health of a cousin. There is a kind of music to these conversations, a gentle back and forth, with long pauses and comfortable silences, and small jokes that do not need to be explained. This is the life of the Chinampa farmer. It is a life of slow, steady repetitive work. There is no glamour in it, no excitement, no dramatic adventure. It is a life of mud and water, of seeds and weeds, of dawns and dusks. And yet, there is a deep satisfaction in it, a satisfaction that comes from doing something with your own hands and seeing it grow and knowing that your work has meaning. The farmer does not need to read about purpose in a book. He feels it in his back, in his calloused hands, in the ache of his knees as he kneels in the soil. He tastes it in the tomato he plucks from the vine and eats, warm from the sun. He sees it in the faces of his children, who are growing up strong and healthy, fed by the work of his hands, and by the love of his wife, and by the deep, ancient generosity of the lake. Let us follow him now as he moves through his day. He has several tasks to do this morning. First, he must check the water level in the canals that are not really canals, but the ditches that run between the Chinampas. The system of water management in the Chinampa world is very subtle and very beautiful. It is not a simple thing of flooding and draining. It is a delicate balance, a constant, gentle adjustment. The farmers have built small gates, or rather, they have made openings in the earth that can be opened or closed with a few scoops of mud. When the water level is low, they open the gates, and the lake water flows in, bringing nutrients and refreshment to the soil. When the water level is high, they close the gates, keeping the water out. It is a simple system, but it requires attention and care and a deep understanding of the rhythms of the lake. And there is another task, too. The farmer must gather the plants that grow in the canals themselves. These are not weeds. They are useful. The reeds, for example, are cut and dried and used for roofing and for making mats and for weaving baskets. The cattails, with their long, brown, sausage-shaped heads, are used for food. The young shoots can be eaten, and the pollen can be made into a kind of flour. And there are other plants with medicinal properties that grow in the shallows. The farmer knows these plants, knows their names, knows what they are for. He has learned this knowledge over many years, and it is stored not in books, but in his memory, passed down to him from his father, who learned it from his father, and so on, back through the generations, all the way to the first people who built the first floating gardens so many centuries ago. And there is also the work of building and repairing the Chinampas themselves. For the gardens are not permanent in the way that a field of dry land is permanent. They require upkeep. The posts that hold them in place, the stakes of willow or cypress, they need to be checked and replaced if they have rotted or loosened. The edges, the banks of the gardens, need to be reinforced with mud and with reeds to keep them from crumbling into the water. And the dredging of the canals, this is important work. Over time, the bottom of the canal fills up with silt, with rich, black, fertile mud. And this mud is very valuable. So the farmer, every now and again, will take his canoe to a part of the canal that has become shallow, and he will scoop up the mud from the bottom, using a wide basket or a hollow log, and he will pile it onto the Chinampa, where it becomes new soil, fresh and rich, ready for planting. This is the cycle. The canal gives, the garden receives. The garden gives, the farmer receives. The farmer gives, the canal receives. It is all one system, a closed and perfect circle. By mid-morning, the sun is well up, and the air is warm. The mist has gone entirely, and the valley is clear and bright. The farmer has finished his work on the canals and on the edges of his garden, and now he turns to the work of planting. He takes a handful of seeds from a small bag at his waist. These are corn seeds, a special variety, with kernels of deep blue and purple. He kneels in the soft earth, and he uses his digging stick to make a small hole. He drops in the seed. He covers it with soil, and he pats it gently, firmly, with the flat of his hand. Then he makes another hole, a little ways from the first, and he repeats the process. There's a rhythm to this work, a slow, rhythmic motion of bend, poke, drop, cover, pat. Bend, poke, drop, cover, pat. Over and over, row after row, the farmer moves through his garden like a slow, deliberate dancer, and the earth accepts the seeds, one by one, with a quiet, patient trust. It is easy in our modern world to forget the miracle of a seed. We see seeds every day in packets, in apples, in the little beads on the outside of strawberries. But to a person who plants them, a seed is a tiny, curled-up life, a promise, a gift. Inside that small, dry, brown kernel is a whole plant, a whole future, a whole year of food. And when the farmer presses that seed into the warm, dark soil and covers it and pats it, he is performing an act of faith. He does not know for certain that the seed will grow. The rains could fail. The pests could come. The frost could come early. But he plants anyway, and he hopes, and he trusts, and he waits. That is the whole job of a farmer in the end, to plant and to wait, and to trust that the seed knows what to do. And there is a kind of profound understanding in the farmer's hands. His hands are not soft. They are cracked and calloused, the hands of a man who works in the earth. But they are also gentle hands. He handles the seeds with care, with tenderness, as if each one were a small treasure. And when he pats the soil over the seed, his touch is firm but loving, the touch of a person who knows that the seed needs the soil to be snug, but not packed too hard, so that the seedling can push through, so that the water can penetrate, so that the air can flow. The farmer does not think about these things as he works. He does not calculate the soil density or the moisture content. He just knows. His body knows. His hands know. It is a knowledge that is older than words, a knowledge that is carried in the muscles and the bones and the skin. And as he plants, he sings. It is a quiet song, a low, humming tune with no clear words. Perhaps it is a song that his grandfather sang, or a song that he has made up himself. Or perhaps it is just the sound of a person working alone, filling the silence with a small, unconscious melody. But there is something ancient and comforting about this singing. It is the sound of a person who is content, a person who is in his place in the world, a person who is not worried about the future, because the future is a green cornstalk stretching up toward the sun. In the heat of the day, the farmer pauses for his midday meal. He sits in the shade of a tree at the edge of his Chinampa, and he eats a simple lunch. There are tortillas, warm from the fire, wrapped in a cloth. There is a bowl of beans cooked with herbs. There is a handful of fresh tomatoes and a little salt. And there is a gourd of water, cool and clean. He eats slowly, savoring each bite, and he watches the water and the birds and the movement of the clouds. He is not reading a newspaper or scrolling on a phone. He is just sitting and eating and resting. The afternoon is ahead of him, full of work. But for now, there is this meal, this shade, this quiet, and he takes it fully, gratefully. We might find a lesson in this, you and I in our own lives. We are so often rushing from one thing to the next, always doing, always moving, always thinking about what comes next. We eat our meals in a hurry, barely tasting them, our eyes on a screen, our minds elsewhere. We forget that a meal can be a prayer, that eating can be a form of thanks, that rest is not a waste of time, but a necessary part of life. The Chinampa farmer knew this. He knew that the work of growing food is a sacred work, and that it deserves to be honored with full attention in the body and in the spirit. So he sat and he ate, and he watched the clouds drift by, and he was part of the slow, good rhythm of the day. In the afternoon, there is more work, the weeding, and this is a task that requires patience and a sharp eye and a willingness to bend down again and again, pulling out the small, green intruders that are not part of the garden's design. The farmer does not hate the weeds. He is not angry at them. He simply removes them gently, firmly, and places them in a pile where they will dry out and be added to the compost to become rich, dark soil for next season. Even the weeds are part of the cycle. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is thrown away. Everything is returned to the earth, and the earth, in her slow and patient way, transforms it and gives it back as life. And there is the watering. On a hot day, the Chinampa, with its proximity to the lake, almost waters itself. The roots of the plants reach down into the moist soil, into the water table that is always, at the Chinampa's heart, connected to the lake. And so they drink, constantly, from the great, cool reservoir below. But the farmer still needs to be attentive. He checks the smaller, raised beds, the ones that are drier, and he waters them by hand, using a gourd or a clay pot, dipping into the canal, and pouring the water gently around the base of each plant. It is a slow process, this hand watering, but it is also a time of closeness, a time when the farmer truly sees his plants, one by one, and notices if a leaf is turning yellow, or if a stem is weak, or if a tomato is almost ready to pick. And there is also the work of fishing. The Chinampa farmer is not only a farmer, he is also, in a small way, a fisherman. The canals and the lake are full of fish, good, white fish and frogs, and the little creatures that are called axolotls, which are a kind of salamander with feathery gills and a strange and beautiful face. Farmer may set a net or a trap in the canal and check it later, or he may take his children out in the evening to fish with small hand nets, laughing together as the net comes up dripping, maybe with a silver fish, maybe with only a few strands of waterweed. The food that comes from the water is another gift of the lake, another part of the abundance that made the Chinampa world so rich, so able to feed the great city of Tenochtitlan. As the afternoon wears on, the light begins to change again. The sun, which was high and bright, begins to soften and to slant, and the shadows of the Chinampas stretch across the canals, dark and cool. The air, which was warm and dry, takes on a freshness, a hint of the coolness to come. The birds begin their evening songs, more full and varied than the songs of the morning, as if they are given a farewell to the day. And the farmer, who has worked steadily since dawn, begins to slow down, to finish his tasks, to gather his tools and his baskets, and to prepare for the evening. There is a sense of completion in this slowing, a sense of satisfaction. The work is done. The day is ending. And it has been a good day, a full day, a day of growth and of care. But there is one more journey to make, and this is a special one. It is the journey to the market. Not all the produce from the Chinampas is consumed by the farmer and his family. Much of it is sold. And the great market of Tenochtitlan, the city that was built on an island in the middle of the lake, was one of the largest and most organized markets in all of the world. Merchants came from all over the empire and from beyond the empire to buy and sell goods of every kind: food, cloth, pottery, tools, jewelry, feathers, animals, medicine, and more. And the Chinampa farmers, with their fresh vegetables and their beautiful flowers, were among the most important suppliers of the market's food. So, on a day like this, perhaps a day that is a market day, the farmer and his family will load their canoe with the harvest. There are baskets of tomatoes, red and ripe, and baskets of chilies, green and red, and bundles of beans, and large green squash and ears of corn, still in their husks, and stacks of fresh herbs. And there are the flowers. The Chinampas were famous for their flowers, and the Aztec people loved flowers, used them in their ceremonies, their celebrations, their daily life. The farmer has a special section of his garden given over to flowers, and he has been tending to them carefully, planning their harvest, waiting for the exact moment when they are at their peak of bloom. And now, on this evening or early in the next morning, he will cut the long stems and tie them in bundles and pack them gently in the canoe and bring them to market. The canoe, laden with produce, sits low in the water. The farmer and his wife, or his older children, are in the canoe, and they paddle out into the channel, turning their bow toward the great city. The journey from the Chinampas to Tenochtitlan could take several hours, depending on the distance and the wind. But the journey is not an unpleasant one. The canals are busy. There are other canoes carrying other farmers, other goods, other families. There are the great dugout canoes of the wealthy lords, decorated with carvings and with fans of feathers. There are the small, fast canoes of the messengers and the officials, and there are always the sounds of the water, the creak of paddles, the splash of a fish, the calls of birds. It is a water world, a city built on water, and the canoes are its veins and its arteries, carrying life and trade through the heart of the empire. We can imagine, as the canoe draws closer to the city, a growing sense of excitement. The outlines of the temples appear on the horizon, the great pyramids, with their steep steps, rising against the sky. The city is enormous. It is built on the lake, on a series of islands and artificial platforms, and it is connected to the shore by great causeways, long, straight roads of earth and stone, with bridges that can be opened to allow the passage of canoes, or to defend the city against attack. The houses of the city are low, flat-roofed, built of adobe and stone, with the roofs often covered with gardens, small patches of green floating on the buildings themselves. The streets are not streets in our sense, but canals, and the main thoroughfares are wide and straight, lined with trees and with the low, white houses. And everywhere in this city there are people, paddling, walking along the causeways, trading, working, living their lives in a place that is half water, half land. And at the center of the city is the great market of Tlatelolco. It is not the only market in the city, but it is the largest, the most magnificent, the one that the traveler remarked upon with wonder and with awe. It would not be too much to say that the market was a city within the city, a place so vast and so crowded that a person could get lost in it for a day. There were sections for different goods. A section for vegetables, where the Chinampa farmer would set up his stall, spreading out his tomatoes and his chilies and his beans and his squash. A section for maize, where great sacks and baskets of corn in many colors were on display. A section for meat, where hunters brought in deer, rabbits, wild turkeys, and where dogs, the little hairless ones that were raised for food, were sold. A section for fish, where the fishermen of the lake brought their daily catch. A section for clothing, for cloth, for sandals. A section for pottery, for obsidian knives, for medicines, for herbs, for feathers of every color. It was a cornucopia, a horn of plenty, a world of things, all gathered in one great, bustling square. And the sounds of the market are a symphony. There is the hubbub of the crowd, a low, continuous noise of voices, of bargaining, of calling out. There are the sounds of goods being moved, of baskets being set down, of corn being ground on the metate for the tortillas that are being made fresh at the little food stalls. There are the smells, too, and these are important. The smell of fresh vegetables, earthy and green. The smell of cooking, of corn and beans and chilies, of meat roasting over open fires. The smell of people and of animals and of the lake itself, which is never far away. The Chinampa farmer, standing behind his display, breathes in all these smells and he feels at home, because this is his place, his market, his city. He is not a stranger here. He is a provider, a feeder, a source of life. And there is a dignity in this that he carries with him, along with the weight of his baskets, as he stands and waits for the customers. The customers come. They look and they touch and they ask the price. Farmer answers, and there is bargaining, a kind of dance, a gentle back and forth. The customer offers less. The farmer shakes his head. The customer offers a little more. The farmer considers and agrees, and the transaction is made. It is not an unfriendly process. There is a mutual respect, a shared understanding that both parties must benefit from the exchange. The farmer wants a fair price for his goods, the food that he has grown with his hands, the work that has cost him days and months. The customer wants good food for his family for a reasonable price. And between them, there is a bond that is formed every time a basket of tomatoes is handed over, a bond of trust and of community. This is one of the oldest forms of human relationship, the relationship between the grower and the eater, and the market is where they come together. And as the afternoon turns to evening, the market begins to wind down. The crowds thin. The stalls are taken down, the goods gathered up, the canoes loaded again. The farmer counts his earnings, the cacao beans and the cotton cloth that serve as money, and he feels a quiet sense of accomplishment. He has fed his family, and he has fed others. He has sold his harvest, and he has earned the wherewithal to buy the things he needs, the things his family needs, maybe a new pot, or a length of cloth, or some small luxury, a jar of honey, or a bunch of feathers. There is a deep satisfaction in this, a satisfaction that is not about wealth, but about exchange, about being part of a cycle of giving and receiving that sustains the whole community. The journey home is a quieter one. The sun is setting, and the lake is spread out before him like a sheet of rose-colored glass. The temples and the causeways of the great city are behind him now, growing smaller and smaller, until they are just a dark shape on the horizon. Ahead of him are the Chinampas, his fields, his gardens, his home. He paddles steadily, his paddle cutting through the water with a soft, rhythmic sound, and he thinks about the day, the market, the people he has seen, the words that were exchanged, the produce that was sold. And he thinks, too, about his own Chinampa, his little piece of land, and the satisfaction of returning to it, of tying up his canoe, of walking up the path to his house, where his wife and his children are waiting for him. And when he arrives, there is a small celebration. Not anything grand, just the family gathered together, sharing the evening meal. The tortillas, the beans, the squash, the tomatoes, all fresh, all from his own garden. They eat and they talk about the day, the children sharing their small adventures, the wife sharing the news from the neighbors, the farmer telling about the prices in the market, about the strange merchant he met, about the beautiful feathers he saw. There is laughter. There is the warmth of the fire. There is the comfort of being together in the small, snug house, while outside the night settles over the water and the stars begin to come out again. And so another day ends. The farmer and his family sleep, and they dream, and they are not worried about the future, because the future is the next season, and the season after that, and the seasons have a rhythm, and the rhythm is trustworthy. The Chinampa will continue to produce. The lake will continue to hold them. The city will continue to flourish and to grow and to need them. And there is a profound security in this, a security that comes from being embedded deeply and completely in a living system, a system of water and land, of plants and animals, of humans and nature, that is self-sustaining, that is whole. But let us step back now for a moment from the daily life of the farmer and consider the larger story, the story of how the Chinampas came to be and how they shaped the world around them. For the Chinampa system did not emerge whole in a single generation. It was the product of many lifetimes, of trial and error, of gradual refinement, of slow, patient learning. The first people who built the floating gardens were not the Aztecs, as we might suppose, but earlier peoples, the ancestors of the Aztecs, who lived in the Valley of Mexico long before the great city of Tenochtitlan was founded. These early settlers were like the Aztecs, a people who came to the valley as wanderers, looking for a home. And they found the lake, a vast, shallow, marshy expanse, and they saw, perhaps, not a place to live, but a place that could be made livable. They saw the reeds, the rushes, the cattails, the water, and they had the idea, the brilliant, patient, humble idea, that they could build a garden out of the water itself. The earliest Chinampas were probably quite crude, simple rafts of reeds and mud that floated on the surface of the lake, and that maybe were used for only a few seasons before they sank or rotted away. But over time, the people who tended them learned. They learned which reeds to use and how to weave them. They learned how to pile the mud so that it would stay. They learned how to anchor the rafts with posts and with willows so that they would not drift away or be lost in a storm. They learned how to plant and how to tend and how to harvest. And generation after generation, they refined their craft until the Chinampa became the beautiful and efficient system that it was in the time of the Aztec Empire. And when the Aztecs themselves arrived in the early 14th century, they arrived in a valley that was already inhabited by settled peoples, with farms and villages and towns. The Aztecs were, at first, a poor and wandering people, a people without a home, and they were not welcomed by the inhabitants of the valley, who saw them as uncivilized, as outsiders, as a threat. But the valley offered a refuge of a sort. The lake and its marshy edges were not claimed by any of the city-states because they were considered useless. You could not build a city on a marsh. You could not grow crops on open water. And so the Aztecs, in their wanderings, were permitted, reluctantly, to settle on a small, rocky island in the lake, a place of reeds and snakes, a place that no one else wanted. And it was there, on that unwanted island, that Tenochtitlan would be born. And it was there that the Aztec people, who had been farmers and gardeners in their earlier wanderings, turned to the lake and began to build. They built their first Chinampas, their first floating gardens, and they grew their first crops, and they began, slowly, carefully, to make a life for themselves. They did not have iron tools or large beasts of burden or wheels. They had their hands and their digging sticks and their courage and their intelligence. And they used what they had, and they made a world. They built Chinampas and temples and houses and palaces. They dug canals and built causeways and raised aqueducts to bring fresh water from the hills. They grew into a great civilization, a civilization that rose from the water, that was founded on the water, that was sustained by the water. And at the heart of that civilization, always, was the simple, humble, extraordinary work of the Chinampa farmer, building a garden out of lake mud, and feeding a city of hundreds of thousands of people. It is a remarkable story, and we could easily spend many more hours exploring it. We could talk about the aqueducts, those long stone channels that brought clean, cold water from the springs of Chapultepec to the island city, so that the people could drink and bathe and cook. We could talk about the causeways, those great, straight roads that connected the island to the mainland, roads so wide that many horsemen could ride abreast, roads that were fortified with walls and gates. We could talk about the temples, the great pyramids, the places of worship and of sacrifice, the complex and beautiful religion of the Aztecs, with its many gods and goddesses, its ceremonies and festivals, its deep connections to the cycles of nature, to the planting and the harvesting, to the corn and the rain and the sun. All of these are part of the story, and all of them are fascinating. But for tonight, perhaps, we might let our attention rest on the Chinampas, on those humble, floating gardens, and on the lesson that they teach us. And the lesson is this, that great things are built from small, patient actions. The Aztec Empire did not begin with a grand plan. It began with a seed planted in a small, floating patch of mud. It began with a farmer kneeling in the water, working with his hands. It began with the willingness to see possibility in a place that others considered worthless. It began with the courage to build a home in a marsh and the wisdom to make that marsh bloom. The Chinampas are a monument to slow, patient work, to the accumulated effort of countless hands over countless years. They are a monument to the idea that we can work with the world, not against it, that we can create abundance without destroying the source of that abundance, that we can live in partnership with the natural world and not in opposition to it. And there is another lesson too, and it is perhaps the most relevant one for us. The lesson of the Chinampa is a lesson about time. The Chinampa farmers were not in a hurry. They did not expect instant results. They planted seeds and waited patiently for them to grow. They built their garden slowly over years, adding mud and reeds and soil, bit by bit. They understood that the most important things in life take time, and that forcing growth, hurrying growth, is not the way of the seed. The seed knows its own pace. The corn grows at the pace of corn. The tomato ripens at the pace of the tomato. And the farmer, in his wisdom, does not try to speed up the process. He tends, and he waits, and he trusts. And this is so hard for us in our own lives, because we are always in such a hurry. We want everything right away. We want results instantly. We want to skip the waiting and go straight to the harvest. But the Chinampa farmer, kneeling in his garden, speaks to us across the centuries, and he reminds us that there is another way. The way of patience, the way of trust, the way of slow, steady, faithful work. And so we return once more to the Chinampa. We have been on a long journey, all of us, from the quiet night to the busy market, to the grand temples of the city, and back again to this small, green island in the middle of the water. And it is evening again, as it so often is in these stories, and the stars are just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The farmer is sitting on the edge of his Chinampa, with his feet dangling over the water, and he is looking out across the canals, and he is at peace. The work is done. The market is a memory. The day has been full, and the night is soft, and there is nothing left to do but rest. And perhaps, as he sits there, he thinks about his children, and about his children's children, and about the generations that will come after him. And he knows that the Chinampa and the lake and the city will pass into their hands, and that they will tend them as he has tended them, and that the cycle will continue. This is the truth of the Chinampa. It is not a finished thing. It is a process, a continuing living process that connects one generation to the next, that connects the past to the future, that connects the hands of the farmer to the soil of the garden, and the soil of the garden to the water of the lake, and the water of the lake to the sky above, and the sky above to the stars, and the stars to us, the listeners who are receiving this story tonight, in our own time, in our own rooms, lying in our own beds, with our own thoughts slowly drifting toward sleep. The story is a bridge too. It is a bridge across time, a way of connecting our modern lives, with all their speed and noise and complexity, to that other world, that slow, green, watery world where a farmer knelt in the mud and planted a seed and waited and hoped and trusted. Let us take one more moment here, in this quiet place. The water is lapping gently against the edges of the Chinampa. The reeds are rustling in a soft breeze that carries the scent of corn and of flowers. The stars are bright in their thousands and their millions, and they are reflected in the dark water, so that it seems as if we are floating in a sea of light. And then, softly, somewhere in the distance, there is a sound. It is a flute, perhaps, or a song, coming from one of the other Chinampas, or from the city beyond. And it is a simple, sad, sweet melody, a lullaby, a song of the evening, a song of gratitude, a song of rest. The melody floats across the water, through the reeds, over the dark fields, and it reaches us, and it wraps around us like a warm blanket, and it holds us, the way the lake holds the Chinampas, gently, steadily, endlessly. And that is the story for now. We have come to the end of this evening's telling, but the story itself does not end. It continues in the world, in the Chinampas that are still tended in certain places, in the lakes that still reflect the stars, in the seeds that are still planted, and the harvests that are still gathered, and in the hearts of all those who hear this story, and who are touched by it, and who carry it with them in their dreams, and in their quiet moments, and in the deep, slow current of their sleep. We have rested here in the middle of the water, and we have been held, and we have been safe. And as we drift now toward the end of this telling, toward the soft, dark edge of sleep, we can carry the Chinampa with us. We can carry the patience of the farmer, the stillness of the night, the shimmering of the stars on the water, and we can let it all become part of our own inner landscape, part of our own quiet, fruitful, floating world. So let us release, for a moment, the weight of our own days. Let us let go of the hurry, the noise, the endless list of things to be done. Let us feel, instead, the slow, warm earth beneath us, the cool, clear water around us, the vast, gentle sky above us. Let us be like the farmer at rest. Let us be like the Chinampa, held. Let us be like the seed, waiting, patient, full of promise, buried in the dark, but already beginning, already stirring, already dreaming of the green stem, the broad leaf, the bright flower, the ripe fruit that will come in its own time, as all things come when the season is right, and the soil is warm, and the water is near. And let us know that we too are part of the great cycle, the endless turning, the planting and the reaping, the building and the tending, the letting go and the receiving, the quiet, faithful, beautiful work of being alive. The stars are bright above us. The water is dark and deep beneath us. The story is here, and it is long, and it is gentle, and it is ready to hold us whenever we are ready to return to it. And now, dear listener, the Chinampa is still, and the farmer is asleep, and the canals are quiet, and the night is full of soft darkness and slow, good rest. Let us rest too. Let us rest and dream and grow in our own quiet way, like seeds in the dark, like gardens on the water, resting, ready, and held. And yet, even as we prepare to drift away, there is one more small corner of this story we might visit, not because it is necessary, but because it is sweet, and because nights such as this are made for lingering. The farmer sleeps, yes, curled in his humble shelter of reeds and wood, with a woven blanket pulled up to his chin, and his breathing is slow and even, like the lapping of the water against the garden. But the lake itself is not entirely asleep. There is a movement beneath the surface, a gentle stirring, and it is there, in the cold, clear shallows, that an older memory lives, a memory that belongs not to the farmer alone, but to the entire lake, and to the reeds, and to the mud itself. Let us go back, then back in time, long before the city rose in the middle of the water, long before the temples lifted their heads toward the sky, back to a time when the lake was simply a lake, wide and wild, and the people who lived along its shores were few and quiet. They were fishers, most of them, and they built small boats from the reeds that grew in abundance, and they pushed those boats through the shallow water, looking for fish, looking for birds' eggs, looking for anything the lake might offer. And sometimes, when they poled their way through the great beds of reeds that crowded the marsh, they noticed something curious. There were islands there, little mounds of mud and decayed plant matter, built up over centuries by the slow accumulation of the lake itself. And on these mounds, in the springtime, seeds would land and sprout. And for a few weeks, there would be a small green patch, a little garden of wild plants, standing stubbornly above the waterline. The fishers did not think much of it, except perhaps to note that such places were good for finding tender greens, or even a stray melon vine. But they did not plant anything themselves. Not at first. One can only imagine the moment when some hungry soul, lost in the reeds on a foggy morning, found one of these natural islands and saw, perhaps, a clump of amaranth or a few stalks of corn, and thought to himself, what if I helped it along? What if I placed a few seeds here deliberately and returned when the season had turned? We do not know this person's name, and in truth, He is less a person than an idea, a figure made of mist and patience, but we can picture him anyway. He was probably an ordinary man, with calloused hands and a tired back, maybe someone who had grown weary of the chase, of the daily uncertainty of fishing, and who wanted something more certain, something he could tend. And so, one day, he did a small thing. He collected a little mud from the bottom of the lake, and he built up the edge of one of those natural islands, and he planted a seed. Perhaps he sang a small song while he worked, or perhaps he was silent, listening to the birds. It does not matter. What matters is that he came back, not once, but many times. And each time he added a little more mud, a little more reeds, a little more care. And in doing so, he changed the shape of the lake and the shape of the future. And here, dear listener, is the gently humorous part of the story, the part that makes one smile in the quiet of the night. This first gardener, this shadowy ancestor of all the Chinampa farmers who would follow, had no idea what he was doing. He was not trying to invent agriculture. He was not attempting to build a foundation for an empire. He was simply trying to grow a few greens for his supper. But the lake, being a generous thing, responded to his attention, and his little mud garden bore more than he had planted, and his neighbors noticed. They noticed that this man had squash and tomatoes and chilies, while they were still chasing fish through the weeds, and eventually they too began to build their own little islands, their own gardens in the marsh. And in this way, in this slow, accidental, utterly unglamorous way, the great Chinampa tradition was born. There was no triumphant announcement, no grand ceremony, no single moment of discovery. There was only a seed planted by one tired man and a lake that said yes. The humor of it is this, that the most consequential discoveries are rarely made by those who are trying to make them. The first farmer who built a Chinampa was not a pioneer of sustainability, not a visionary of urban agriculture. He was a man with a hungry family who got his feet wet in the mud, who cursed the mud, perhaps, and the mosquitoes, and the cold water in the winter, and who nonetheless came back the next day, and the next, not because he knew he was making history, but because the garden was working, because the seeds had sprouted, because there is something in us that looks upon a growing thing and wants to see it grow more. And so the lake, which had once been only a wild place of reeds and water, became a place of order and abundance, a place where people could build homes and raise families and live in peace, all because one person, a long time ago, had the simple, stubborn idea to plant a seed in a patch of mud and wait for it to bear. Now, if we were to visit that marsh in those early years, before the city grew, we would find a very different scene than the one the farmer left behind today. The Chinampas would be smaller, humbler, irregular, more like patches of grass floating on the water than the orderly rectangles of the great capital. The farmers would be fewer, and they would know each other by name, and they would share tools and seeds and advice, and sometimes a jug of pulque at the end of the day. The canals would be narrower, and the trees along the edges would be younger, and the whole enterprise would have about it the feel of a village that was still learning, still discovering, still figuring out what it could become. And this, too, is a comfort to us, because it reminds us that great things do not emerge fully formed. They begin small, and they grow slowly, and they are shaped by the hands of ordinary people who are simply trying to do their best with what they have. There is a legend, and it is only a legend, but it is a pleasant one, that in those early days, a farmer lost his wedding bracelet in the murky water. Now, the bracelet was made of jade, and it was precious, and he had received it from his wife, and he was afraid to tell her that he had lost it. So he searched the mud with his hands, and he searched and he searched, and he stirred up so much muck that, when he finally emerged, empty-handed and covered in mud, he noticed that the soil around his garden seemed richer, more alive, more ready to grow. And so the legend says, his loss became the field's gain, and the practice of adding fresh mud to the gardens was born out of a household accident. It is probably not true, this legend. It is probably just a story that the farmers told to each other over the years, to pass the evening, to make each other laugh. But there is a little truth in it, the truth that great benefits often come from small misfortunes, that the mud we stumble through can become the ground we grow from, and that even a lost piece of jade, if we let it, can teach us something about how to care for the things that remain. And then the night is quiet again, and the farmer stirs in his sleep, and the boats are tied to their posts, and the water is covered with a thin, silver film of starlight. The young men and women of the village no longer worry about jade bracelets or lost things, and the market is thousands of households away, and the city sleeps in its old, heavy dream. But the Chinampas remain, and they have always remained through drought and flood, through war and peace, through the rise of kings and the fall of dynasties. The mud was there before the city, and the water was there before the mud, and the seed was there before the water, and the seed and the water and the mud together form a kind of promise, a covenant that says, as long as there are hands to plant and patience to wait, the garden will endure. So let us hold this final image now, as the story truly settles into rest. There is a lake, and the lake is dark, and the lake is wide, and the lake is older than the names of the people who once lived upon it. There are gardens, hundreds of them, and they are not abandoned, not lost. They are